philosophy.
What is and what is not true.
Those who know themselves.
Being better every single day.
The internet makes it really easy to live inside our own little content bubbles where we're protected from any viewpoints other than those with which we already agree. But this is a big problem. In the same way that dealing with challenges makes us better and more resilient, exposure to opposing viewpoints makes us intellectually sharper and more insightful. When we aren't exposed to opposing perspectives, we don't learn how to relate to the people who hold those perspectives. As a result, our worldview becomes fragile and unable to integrate any new information that challenges it. It also leads to disconnection from and condemnation of those views and people that we don't agree with. We fear what we don't know. A concern I've had for the past several years is that we seem to be isolating ourselves into separate moral tribes. Of course, there's nothing new about disagreement itself. Throughout history, humans have always disagreed with each other. We've disagreed over which religion is best, how much taxes we should pay, who should lead our nations, and countless other things. Over many thousands of years, however, humans have learned that the most sustainable way to work through most disagreements is by engaging with opposing views. However, in the absence of robust discourse, humans, just like any other animal, tend to resort to physical violence as a means of persuading our enemies. Basically, if we want to avoid riots and wars, we have to have better conversations. But it seems we're getting to the point in our culture where a mere difference in perspective or value judgment is itself intolerable. Each side is convinced that they are right and the other side is misguided, ignorant, or malicious. I believe the solution to this problem has two parts to it. The first is proactively exposing ourselves to different and possibly even offensive perspectives. Kind of like the way we expose ourselves to resistance when we're weight training. The second part is engaging with those perspectives in constructive ways. I recently spoke with someone on this podcast who I believe is addressing the first part of the solution very, very well. Her name's Harleen Kaur, and if you want to check out our episode, it's the most recent one I published called Break Out of Your Content Bubble. Harleen is a former NASA engineer, and she's the founder of Ground News. And Ground News is a news platform whose goal is to combat media bias by allowing users to compare how different news outlets from across the political spectrum are covering the same story. I've been using Ground News for a while. I really like it. It helps me get a more well-rounded perspective on current events. Anyway, check out that episode for more about Ground News and for more about the state of affairs when it comes to kind of living in our own content bubbles, because I think we talk about that in a really relatable way. Now, to address the second part of the solution, how do we constructively engage with people whose views conflict with our own? Well, for that, I've put together a short list of tips based on research from communication books I've read and also my own trial and error. I thought it would be a good time to publish this particular episode since we're approaching that time of year when we spend time with our wacky relatives and whatnot. But these suggestions are not meant to be implemented rigidly. They are meant to be adapted to the personality of the person or the group with whom you're engaging, and also to the situation in which you find yourself. So here are 6 tips for engaging with people who we disagree with. The first, tip number 1, is actually listen. This may seem obvious, but the fundamentals are often the most effective thing we can do. In this case, the best strategy is often to simply pay attention to what the other person's saying. When one or more of the parties involved in a conversation or disagreement don't feel as though they're being heard, it does not promote trust or goodwill. In fact, it does the opposite. Both trust and goodwill are necessary components of having a productive conversation. Conversely, when both parties feel as though the other is truly listening to their points without an agenda, it goes a long way in smoothing over rough patches and maintaining an open mind. Okay, now for tip number 2, restate their argument. How do you prove you're listening? by echoing to the other person what they've just said. You may even consider setting up a rule for yourself, something like only state your view after you can restate the other person's views to their satisfaction. That looks something like, so if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is XYZ. Is that right? And then when the other person confirms, now you have a mutually agreed upon ground for continuing the conversation. And if you can manage it, try to make their point even stronger than they did it. This is called steel manning and stands in contrast to our ineffective default strategy of straw manning, or attacking the flimsiest, weakest version of someone's position. Why go through all this trouble? As I've mentioned, it shows that you're listening with the intention to understand, but there is another benefit. When you steel man your opponent's argument before you make your own, you make your argument appear stronger and more credible, and people are more likely to trust you. Tip number 3 is be honest about what you don't know. This one will really make you stand out because almost nobody does it. Not even the smartest people in the world can know everything about everything, so don't pretend that you do. Especially when talking about contentious topics, be honest about what you know and what you don't know. When you're honest about what you don't know, you'll seem more credible when you assert something you do know. When you humble yourself, you disarm people and you give them a chance to be gracious toward you. And that's just human nature. Hey there, I wanted to take a quick moment to tell you about one of our sponsors for this show, Skillshare. I love learning new skills and keeping my mind sharp. Skillshare is by far one of my favorite ways to do this. It's an online learning community with thousands of different classes for creative and curious people. You can take classes on writing, photography, cooking, productivity, social media marketing, and much more. As many of you know, I've been working on a book. A while back, I took a couple writing classes on Skillshare, one by essayist Roxane Gay and another by Simon Van Buie, who's an author. And I was just blown away by the depth and clarity and practicality of these classes. Both really helped me to hone my skills and improve my craft. Skillshare is all video-based and it's all self-paced, which I love. And most classes are under an hour with short lessons to fit any schedule. I'm talking like 10 minutes per lesson in most cases, which is a very digestible way to break up any new subject. And it's less than $10 a month with an annual subscription. So explore your creativity at Skillshare.com/thinkgrow. And if you visit that link, you'll get a free trial of their premium membership. That's Skillshare.com/thinkgrow. Okay, tip number 4 is assume other people's motives are just as pure and noble as your own. It's extremely easy to dismiss those who disagree with us as ignorant or misinformed. But it's much harder to consider that these people may be just like us, decent human beings who are trying to understand reality and navigate it as best they can. And I think we just need to come to terms with an unsettling reality, which is that there are good people with good intentions who want the same outcome as us, but whose views happen to conflict with our own. That's a difficult pill to swallow, but I think it's one that will improve our attitude toward other people, especially those that disagree with us. Now, let me be clear. I know there are some people that are not operating in good faith. Trolls exist, after all. But as far as I can tell, as long as someone is being reasonably respectful and earnestly trying to make their points, give them the benefit of the doubt. That's the best strategy. And that brings us to tip number 5. Ask questions. As a general rule, people love to be asked questions. It makes us feel important and respected and valued. Questions like, how did you come to that view? Or what do you think of people who say XYZ? Or, wow, where'd you learn that? You seem to know a lot about this. These kinds of earnest and genuine questions go a long way in building rapport. Whenever you disagree with someone, approach the conversation as if you're just trying to clarify your own thoughts. This is a strategy that I found really useful. And in truth, this is what you should be doing, trying to clarify your own thoughts. In fact, research has shown that when really pressed, we tend to know less than we think we do on a given topic. When it actually comes down to it and we have to display our knowledge, we know less than we think we do. So often in debates and arguments around heated issues, we often confuse intense emotions and strong intuitions for knowledge and certainty. So if you take a position of you're not sure and you're just trying to figure things out, it lets you off the hook just a little bit. If you must state your views, if there is something that you want to counter, like an opinion or a perspective that you want to counter, consider this approach. Try asking them for permission. You might say, hey, are you open to a different perspective on this? And that could open the door. That could at least psychologically prime them for hearing a different point of view. Okay, and that brings us to our final tip, number 6. Try to see the humanity in everyone. Humans are tribal creatures by nature. This is just built into us. Our default pattern is to otherize and even dehumanize those we deem different from us. This is a pattern that you can see in history going way, way, way back. Now, this difference could be rooted in the physical appearance of others, and has been, certainly, but it can also be rooted in their views. People who think differently than us are considered outside of our group. To counterbalance this natural tendency, which is something that I think we need to do in a global society, to counterbalance this, we must remember that people are much more than their beliefs. That's an obvious thing, and I think we all know that, but we have to remind ourselves of that. Our perceived opponents are rarely the one-dimensional monsters our minds have made them out to be. Just because someone has views that we disagree with doesn't mean that we get to cancel him or her as a person. Now, obviously, we must hold people accountable who've committed egregious acts. Like, this is what our legal system is for. This is why people are in jail, theoretically, and obviously there's flaws with that too. But the idea is that there are punishments for people, there are official punishments for people who cross the line. But in everyday life, we do need to separate the person from his or her views. A person can have disagreeable and even wrong views, but we must remember that he or she is still a sister, still a brother, still a mother, a father, a friend, a coworker, and a million other things. That person has hopes, dreams, anxieties, problems, just like we do. Furthermore, shaming people is a terrible strategy for influencing them. Just ask shame researcher Brené Brown. In fact, it often causes them to dig their heels in further or behave destructively. And then finally, when we dismiss a person or a group based solely on certain views that they hold, we cut ourselves off from the possibility of discovering other views of theirs, which may be insightful. People don't have all the right views. Not everyone has a monopoly on the truth. Some people have some really good thoughts and really useful insights, and other insights that maybe aren't so useful. So when we completely cancel a person, even in our own minds, we preclude ourselves from finding something that they actually might say or do that's valuable. So to sum up, true progress is not made by isolating ourselves from opposing perspectives. It's made when we actively engage with those perspectives. By the same token, true understanding begins when we make a serious attempt to hear where our perceived opponents are coming from. Now, there is a downside to exposing yourself to opposing views, and that is that it's uncomfortable and it's destabilizing. But there's also a downside of not doing so, of not exposing yourself to opposing views, and that is that you'll never learn anything new. Because the only time we learn new things is when we are exposed to new information. That sounds like a platitude or a tautology there, but it is the truth nonetheless. Lastly, I'll just encourage you to keep in mind the old proverb that I have tucked away in the back of my mind, which is, a wise person knows there is something to be learned from everyone. Hey, thanks for listening. You can find the show notes for this episode and all other episodes on my website at thinkgrowprosper.com/podcast. That's where I put all the links and resources mentioned in each episode. It's also where I put the outlines of topics covered, which is a really good way to refer back to episodes in the future. Lastly, if you enjoyed this episode, I'd love to hear about it. Feel free to leave a review on iTunes with your biggest takeaway. I make it a point to read all the reviews. You can also screenshot this episode and share it to your social media along with something you learned or found interesting. And tag me in your post because I'd love to see what you found interesting. Say hi and thank you for your support.